I'd always suspected my family would find new and creative ways to pretend I didn't exist, but even I had to admire their commitment to the bit. After Thanksgiving, when I'd stood up in the middle of dinner, knocked over my father's ridiculous crystal turkey centerpiece, and read aloud every last detail of their tax evasion, insurance fraud, and various assorted petty scams, I figured they'd at least have the decency to change their phone numbers. Instead, they just pretended I'd evaporated. 6 weeks of radio silence. Not a call. Not an email. Not even one of my mother's performative guilt texts about how family is forever. It was almost peaceful, like living in an emotional quarantine zone where I could finally breathe without someone trying to invoice me for existing. So when a thick envelope arrived at my shoebox apartment in Portland, summoning me to a law office on Hawthorne Avenue, I laughed. Literally laughed out loud, standing barefoot in the kitchen with a mug of day-old coffee, thinking, oh, this is going to be good. I knew exactly what this was, one last chance for them to gloat. To tell me, in person, that Walter Grant's estate had been divided among the worthy, and I should count myself lucky they didn't charge me for parking. The morning of the meeting, I pulled on the least wrinkled dress shirt I owned, pale blue, a little too tight in the shoulders, and practiced my best polite smile in the mirror. I figured I'd need it when my father inevitably called me, ungrateful, for the 1000th time. The law office was a high-rise on Hawthorne Avenue, all brushed steel and wide windows designed to make middle-aged men feel important. The receptionist had the expression of someone who'd already judged me for existing. She directed me to the conference room with a flick of her French manicured hand. When I walked in, they were all there, arrayed like a panel of judges on some grotesque reality show. My father, Leonard Cole, looking smug in a pinstripe suit that probably cost more than my car. My mother, Diane, clutching a leather folder to her chest like it contained the secrets to her continued relevance, and my sister, Madison, who glanced up from her phone long enough to shoot me a look that said, "You're late. And you're still a disappointment." I sat down opposite them, feeling strangely calm. Almost entertained. Because if they thought this was going to break me, they'd clearly forgotten who they were dealing with. I folded my hands on the polished oak table and smiled just enough to be infuriating. "Morning," I said brightly. "Sorry I didn't RSVP to the pity party. My invite must have gotten lost with all the other important mail." Leonard sighed in that theatrical way he'd perfected years ago. "Ethan," he began, voice dripping with condescension, "we're not here for theatrics. We're here because there are formalities to be handled." "Oh, of course," I said. "Let's get this over with. I'm sure you all have brunch reservations to celebrate inheriting everything." That got me 3 matching scowls. And for a second, it almost felt good to be the black sheep. Better than being part of the flock. Leonard didn't bother to hide the smirk as he pulled a sheaf of papers from his folder, arranging them like a magician about to reveal some cheat card trick. "You should understand," he began, his tone silky with condescension, "that the estate was already divided according to the will Walter signed 5 years ago. The assets have been allocated appropriately, and there are no surprises to discuss. Madison and I have already met with the trustees to arrange the transfers. Everything is in motion." I raised my eyebrows, suppressing a laugh that threatened to escape. It was almost impressive how effortlessly he managed to sound like he was announcing a corporate merger, rather than gleefully cutting me out of my own grandfather's legacy. "We didn't invite you," Diane added, her voice soft in that practiced way she used whenever she wanted to seem gracious. "Because, well, there was no point in getting your hopes up. You've always been so emotional about these things." Emotional. Right. That was her polite code for inconveniently not complicit. At the end of the table, Madison didn't bother looking up from her phone. She was scrolling with one French manicured finger, probably checking her follower count or crafting some chirpy caption about gratitude. "You were never part of this," she said blandly. "Grandpa knew you didn't belong in the family legacy. That's why he left you out." I almost clapped. Really, I did. The performance was so flawless it deserved a standing ovation. But before I could congratulate them on their group delusion, Mr. Hawkins cleared his throat. The lawyer had been sitting there silently, his lined face unmoved by the spectacle. He looked like a man who had witnessed every variety of family meltdown and was already planning what he'd have for lunch after this nonsense was over. "If you're all quite finished," he said evenly, "I'd like to proceed." Leonard gave him a magnanimous nod, the sort of gesture he used on junior colleagues he planned to fire. "Mr. Hawkins," he began, "there's no need to waste everyone's time. The old will is perfectly clear and—" Mr. Hawkins raised a single eyebrow, just one, and it had the effect of shutting my father's mouth mid-sentence. "Yes," he said dryly. "The previous will was indeed clear. However," he flipped open the thick folder in front of him and withdrew a document bound with a blue ribbon, placing it gently in the center of the table like a grenade no one wanted to touch. "It is no longer in effect." Silence settled over the room so completely, I could hear the faint hum of the ventilation system overhead. Diane's perfectly painted lips parted in confusion. "I'm sorry?" she asked, her voice pitching higher. Mr. Hawkins adjusted his glasses, his expression politely implacable. "6 weeks ago," he continued, "Mr. Walter Grant executed a new will. Duly signed, witnessed, and filed with this office." I felt something jolt in my chest, a cautious flicker of hope. But I kept my face neutral, letting them squirm first. Mr. Hawkins went on unhurried. "At that time, Mr. Grant also underwent a full psychiatric evaluation to ensure there would be no question as to his mental capacity. The report is unequivocal. He was of sound mind, fully competent, and aware of all his decisions." He let that hang in the air, then turned a page with excruciating calm. Madison finally looked up, her face pale. "That's impossible," she snapped. "He couldn't have done that without telling us." Mr. Hawkins didn't smile, exactly, but something in his eyes glinted with the faintest amusement. "Apparently," he said, "he preferred to do it without telling you." I tried not to laugh, but a small, incredulous huff slipped out before I could stop it. In that moment, watching their smug certainty collapse like a sandcastle in high tide, I realized something. Walter Grant had always known exactly what he was doing. And maybe, just maybe, he'd left me something more valuable than money. He'd left me the truth. For a moment, no one moved. It was as though the air had turned to wet cement, trapping everyone exactly where they sat. Diane's lips parted and closed, but no sound came out. Leonard looked like he was seconds away from having an aneurysm. Madison was still staring at the document, her phone now dangling forgotten between two fingers. Mr. Hawkins cleared his throat and, with the slow precision of a man who had all the time in the world, reached into the folder for another thick envelope. "Given the family's concern about Mr. Grant's mental state," he said, "he was thoughtful enough to leave a statement addressing precisely that topic." He picked up a small remote control and clicked it. A large screen mounted on the wall flickered to life. And there he was. Walter Grant, sitting in what looked like Mr. Hawkins's office, wearing that old navy plaid shirt he used to garden in. He looked thinner than I remembered, but his eyes were the same, sharp, calm, and entirely unafraid. I felt something lodge in my throat. "If you're watching this," Grandpa began, his voice steady as ever, "it means you're probably arguing. Maybe you're even threatening each other. And you're certainly underestimating me." Madison made a strangled noise in the back of her throat. Walter took a breath and picked up a single sheet of paper. "I am of sound mind," he said, "as certified by Dr. Klein, whose assessment is attached to this will. You'll find her credentials more than satisfactory." He paused, letting that sink in, then adjusted his glasses. "But since I suspect some of you will claim I was confused, let's be clear about who was really confused, about morality, honesty, and loyalty." He lifted the page and began reading. "Leonard," he said evenly, "you've been siphoning money from the family trust for years, disguising it as consulting expenses to pay off your personal debts and prop up your failing business ventures. I have the ledgers. And the bank statements." Leonard's face turned a splotchy shade of red I'd never seen before. "Diane," Grandpa continued, "you've been forging prescriptions to feed your addiction. You should know better. I have the pharmacy records." Diane's hands flew up to her mouth. Her eyes darted around the table as if hoping someone would declare this a prank. Then Walter turned the page. And Madison, he said, his tone softening only slightly, I'm truly sorry you've gotten yourself tangled up with that man you call your boyfriend. You've been laundering money for his so-called consulting firm, which is in fact a front for importing illicit substances. If you're curious how I know, it's because I had your squishy piggy bank examined by a private investigator. There were 20 vials of prescription pills hidden in the bottom. I nearly choked. A squishy piggy bank. It sounded absurd, like a crime committed by a toddler with a credit score. Madison's face had gone a flat, ashen color. Walter set the paper down and looked straight into the camera. There is only one person in this family who never treated me like a burden, he said. Who never asked for anything. Who worked for every scrap of respect he got. That person is Ethan. The air left my lungs. So, he said, I've chosen to leave my estate to him. Not out of spite. Out of gratitude. Because he deserves it. The screen went black. I looked across the table. Diane had tears streaking her foundation. Leonard looked like he was trying to figure out whether to scream or faint. Madison just sat there with her hands in her lap, her phone screen lighting up with an incoming call she didn't even glance at. And for once, I didn't feel like the unwanted extra at the family table. I felt like the only person who'd ever been seen for exactly who he was. Nobody spoke for a long time. It was the kind of silence you'd expect after a bomb goes off, dense, heavy, almost vibrating with the shock of it. Leonard looked as though he'd swallowed a wasp. Diane dabbed her eyes with a tissue, though she didn't seem to be crying so much as trying to hide that she had no idea what to say. Madison kept staring at the blank screen, her phone still ringing in her hand. Mr. Hawkins calmly reached for a fresh sheaf of papers, the corners aligned with surgical precision. If there are no further interruptions, he said, his voice as mild as if he were reciting weather statistics, I will now read the operative provisions of the will. Leonard cleared his throat, the sound dry and rattling. This is outrageous, he barked. My father was manipulated. I refused to believe he would cut us off over petty disagreements. Mr. Hawkins didn't even look up. He simply continued, flipping to the next page. It is the express wish of Walter Grant, he read, that the entirety of his estate, including the primary residence at 48 Maple Hill Lane, all bank accounts and securities, the classic car collection, and the sum total of $4 million in cash reserves, be bequeathed solely and without restriction to his grandson, Ethan Cole. The words fell into the room like bricks. Diane finally found her voice, raw and incredulous. This isn't happening, she whispered. He was sick. He must have been coerced. Mr. Hawkins lifted his gaze with a glacial calm that could have frozen a forest. You are, of course, free to pursue a legal challenge, he said. But I should remind you. And here, he reached into his leather briefcase and, with a theatrical flourish worthy of a stage magician, produced a slim silver combination lockbox. He set it on the table, clicked it open just far enough to show a neat stack of USB drives and bound affidavits inside. That Mr. Grant also provided me with extensive supporting documentation, including notarized statements, banking records, private investigator reports, and a full video deposition, some of which you have already seen, prepared to be submitted to the relevant authorities in the event of any contest. He looked up, letting the moment breathe. Including, he added pleasantly, documentation of activities that would almost certainly trigger federal and state investigations into tax fraud, prescription forgery, and illegal distribution. Madison let out a strangled little gasp. I couldn't help it, a short, incredulous laugh burst out of me. The whole scene had become so absurd I half expected hidden cameras to pop out of the ceiling. Leonard slammed a palm on the table. You think you can blackmail us into silence? He hissed. Mr. Hawkins simply closed the lockbox with a polite click. I'm not blackmailing anyone, he said, his tone smooth as glass. I am merely informing you of Mr. Grant's intentions. Should you pursue litigation, these materials will be submitted to the appropriate parties, as he instructed. You are, of course, free to make your own decisions. My mother finally turned toward me, her face flushed and tight. This is your fault, she said hoarsely. You've poisoned him against us. You've always been a selfish little. No, I interrupted, my voice quiet but steady. He made this decision because he saw exactly who you all are. Maybe it's the first time he ever truly did. Nobody replied. The quiet settled in again, oppressive and final. And somewhere, under all the shock and disbelief, I felt something like relief. For the first time, it wasn't me who had to prove my worth. After the lockbox clicked shut, the room stayed eerily still. Even Madison had stopped tapping her phone, as if she finally understood that no hashtag in the world was going to spin this in her favor. Mr. Hawkins folded his hands neatly over the folder, letting the silence do most of the work. Leonard sat back and exhaled hard through his nose, like a bull trying to decide whether to charge. You really think we're going to let this stand? He demanded, voice rising. You think we'll just walk away while you take everything? I didn't answer. Because the truth was, I hadn't decided yet what any of this meant. Part of me was sick with dread, the way you feel when a windfall drops into your lap and you realize it weighs about 1,000 pounds. Another part felt a numb, unsteady gratitude. A strange raw relief. But mostly, I was tired. Tired of carrying the guilt they'd handed me since I was a kid. Tired of believing I'd earned the way they all acted like I was optional. Mr. Hawkins cleared his throat. If I may, he said, gentler than before. There's one more item Mr. Grant requested I deliver to you personally. He reached into the folder and drew out an envelope, thick cream paper with my name written across the front in Walter's blocky handwriting. Ethan. He held it out to me with a slight incline of his head. My heart beat painfully against my ribs as I took it. The weight of it seemed disproportionate, like it contained more than just paper. I didn't look at my family as I slid my thumb under the flap and unfolded the letter inside. Ethan. If you're reading this, then I've probably just made your life complicated. And for that, I'm sorry. But I've spent a long time watching the people around me pretend kindness is weakness, that decency is something you trade away when it's convenient. You never did that. Even when they gave you every reason to walk away. You stayed decent. You stayed honest. And I'm proud of you for it. I know this inheritance may feel tainted. But it isn't meant to be an act of revenge. It's meant to be a way forward. Use it for something that matters, to you, not to them. Use it to build a life you can look at without regret. Don't let their bitterness stain it. Let this be a clean start. I love you, kid. Walter. I swallowed, hard. When I looked up, Diane was watching me with watery eyes, as though she could still convince me we were all a family if she just looked sad enough. Madison's mouth was pinched tight, and Leonard was shifting uncomfortably in his chair. Mr. Hawkins cleared his throat again, bringing me back to the present. Mr. Grant's instructions are clear, he said. You have every legal right to accept or decline the inheritance. I looked down at the letter in my hand. I could feel Walter's voice in every word. Not scolding. Not shaming. Just trusting. It was the first time in my life someone had given me something without expecting me to pay for it in guilt. I folded the letter carefully and set it on the table in front of me. And for the first time since I walked into that room, I knew what I wanted to do. I took a breath so deep it felt like it reached all the way down into the parts of me that had never gotten enough air. Then I looked each of them in the eye. Leonard. Diane. Madison. They all stared back, waiting for me to flinch or fold. I didn't. If you want any help from me, I said quietly, it's going to require something you've never been willing to offer. Leonard's jaw twitched. And what's that supposed to mean? Honesty, I said. Accountability. If you want me to consider sharing even 1 cent, you will stand up, in front of Mr. Hawkins, and admit everything. The money you stole, the lies you told, all of it. You will own it. Diane's lip quivered. Ethan, please, this isn't the time to. No, I interrupted, my voice steady. It's exactly the time. Madison let out a breathy, humorless laugh. You expect us to confess just because Grandpa made some video? You think you can blackmail your own family? You can call it whatever you want, I said. But if you want help, that's the price. And if you can't do it, that's fine. You can walk away. They all stared at me. For a second, I actually thought maybe, just maybe, they'd say yes. That for once in their lives, they'd take responsibility instead of trying to dodge it. But of course, that was wishful thinking. Leonard's face twisted into something between fury and disgust. "You've always been sanctimonious," he spat. "Always acting like you're better than the rest of us." "I never acted like anything," I said calmly. "I just stopped lying about who you were." Diane dabbed her eyes, but there were no tears left. "You'll regret this," she whispered. "You'll regret throwing your family away over money." "It was never about the money," I said. "It was about respect." Madison stood abruptly, her chair screeching against the polished floor. "You're pathetic," she said, her voice trembling. "Enjoy your little kingdom, Ethan." And just like that, she turned and walked out. Leonard followed without another word. Diane lingered a moment longer, her gaze darting between me and the lockbox on the table. Then she turned and went after them, the door shutting behind her with a soft click that felt louder than any slam. The silence left behind was cavernous. Mr. Hawkins looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "I assume you'd like to proceed with the paperwork?" I nodded. My hand didn't even shake as I reached for the pen he slid across the table. I signed my name. Once. Twice. 3 times. Each signature felt like a door closing, and another one opening. When I looked up, Mr. Hawkins inclined his head, almost like he was giving me a tiny bow. "On behalf of your grandfather," he said, "I wish you peace with this decision." "Thank you," I replied. And I meant it. Because for the first time, it felt like I wasn't inheriting their shame. I was inheriting my own future. I didn't go out to celebrate. I didn't call anyone. Instead, I spent the evening in the old house on Maple Hill Lane, walking through every room. I touched the banister Grandpa used to sand down by hand every spring. I opened the kitchen cabinets where he kept the good dishes he only brought out for birthdays and graduations. I stood in the little den where he'd sit in his recliner and watch baseball, and I felt the emptiness of it all. The money didn't feel triumphant. It felt heavy. Like something I'd have to carry carefully for the rest of my life, or else it would crush me under the same bitterness it had crushed everyone else. In the hallway, I paused in front of the old oak cabinet where Grandpa kept his photo albums. My hand hovered over the brass handle before I finally pulled it open. There were stacks of thick leather-bound books, each one labeled in his neat block letters. Family trips. Birthdays. Little League seasons. My name was written on the spines almost as often as Madison's, though I doubted she'd ever noticed. I flipped one open and ran my fingers over a picture of me at 12, standing next to Grandpa in the garden, both of us holding up armfuls of tomatoes. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen that photo. I closed the album gently and set it back. The next morning, I drove back downtown. Mr. Hawkins looked mildly surprised when I walked into his office unannounced, still wearing the same wrinkled shirt I'd worn the day before. "I'd like to set up a foundation," I told him before he could ask why I was there. He gestured to a chair. "All right. Tell me about it." I sat down, feeling a clarity I hadn't felt in years. "I don't want the money to just sit in a bank account," I said. "I don't want it to become another monument to my family's ego. I want it to do something that actually matters." He nodded once, listening. "I want to create a trust in Walter's name," I continued. "A fund to compensate the people my family hurt, and to help veterans who fell through the cracks. Grandpa spent his whole life trying to do right by people who got left behind. This feels like the least I can do." Mr. Hawkins's expression softened a fraction. "That's a good idea," he said. "Do you have a name for it?" I thought about it for a long moment. Then I said, "The Grant Legacy Foundation." He wrote it down without comment, then looked up. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone." I met his gaze and realized I wasn't doing it to prove something. I was doing it because it was the only way the inheritance would feel like a gift instead of a curse. "Yes," I said. "I'm sure." By the time I left his office, the paperwork was already in motion. And for the first time since all of this began, the weight on my chest felt lighter. Not gone, just bearable. That night, I sat at the old kitchen table and wrote out the first list: names of small business owners Leonard had defrauded, neighbors Diane had scammed with fake insurance policies, friends Madison had tricked with her investment advice. Some of them were names I barely recognized. But I knew they deserved more than silence. 2 weeks later, I sat in a quiet cafe on Hawthorne Avenue with that list and a stack of envelopes. Outside the window, traffic crawled past in the rainy gray light. Inside, I signed the first checks, each one a promise that I would never be like them. And for the first time in years, it felt right. I saved the hardest visit for last. Mrs. Johnson had lived next door to Grandpa for nearly 40 years. She was the one who always brought over casseroles when my mom was too busy staging charity luncheons to cook. When I was a kid, she'd let me sit on her porch swing and eat popsicles while she told me stories about the neighborhood before there were sidewalks and Wi-Fi. She was also the woman Leonard conned out of most of her retirement savings. A short-term bridge loan, he'd called it. He'd promised to pay her back within 6 months. That was 7 years ago. I pulled up in front of her little blue house, clutching the envelope like it might evaporate if I blinked too hard. The porch light was on, even though it was only 4 in the afternoon. Mrs. Johnson answered on the second knock, her hair pinned up neatly, a cardigan buttoned over her shoulders. She looked older than I remembered, smaller somehow, but her eyes were as clear as ever. "Ethan," she said, surprised. "Oh my goodness. Come in, dear." I stepped inside. The living room smelled like lemon polish and old books. "I'm sorry to drop by without calling," I said. "I won't stay long." "Nonsense." She waved me toward the sofa. "Sit. Can I get you some tea?" I shook my head. My throat was too tight for tea. "I'm here because my grandfather left me everything," I said, hearing how flat it sounded when I spoke it aloud. "And I know you were one of the people my father hurt." Her face softened, but she didn't argue. She didn't try to downplay it. "So," I continued, clearing my throat, "I'm not here to make excuses. I'm here to try to make it right." I held out the envelope. She hesitated a moment before taking it. Her hands trembled as she peeled back the flap. When she pulled out the check, she gasped. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice breaking. This is more than I ever." "It's what he owed you," I said gently. "With interest. And an apology. For all of it." Her eyes filled with tears. She pressed the envelope to her chest, like it was something precious. "I don't know what to say," she murmured. "You don't have to say anything," I told her. But she reached out anyway and took my hand in both of hers, her grip surprisingly strong. "Your grandfather would be so proud of you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I hope you know that." I nodded, but I couldn't speak past the lump in my throat. When I finally stepped back out into the late afternoon, the air felt clearer. Like something I had been carrying for too long had finally lifted. I walked down the porch steps, feeling, maybe for the first time, like I wasn't haunted by everything my family had done. I didn't have to be their accomplice anymore. I didn't have to be their excuse. I could just be. As I reached my car, my phone buzzed. A text from Mr. Hawkins. "Foundation account fully funded. Press release goes out tomorrow." I read it twice before tucking the phone back in my pocket. I hadn't lost my family. I'd finally stopped trying to buy their love. And standing there on that quiet street, I realized that was worth more than any inheritance.